I feel so honored to be a part of it. My name is Melissa Reese. I'm a holistic practitioner. I specialize in neurolinguistic programming, hypnotherapy, breakthrough coaching, and Jikid and Reiki. I have a private practice in Phoenix, Arizona, where I see clients one-on-one, but I also see clients all around the world. And I get to do that by the lovely internet. So today we are going to be talking about guilt. I know that that's why everybody is here and signed up for this. Guilt is a very heavy, very unique emotion that often encompasses all the rest of the emotions. And so it can be a more difficult one to work through, even over fear and anger, because it tends to be multi-layered. And there's different kinds of guilt, which I'm going to get into later on. We've got the innate guilt, which is an emotion that we feel innately. But then we have the constructive guilt. And then we have simply feeling bad, and then we have shame. And shame is a construct. It is not an innate feeling. It's something that people have unfortunately constructed. So like I said, we'll dig into that. I had an entire presentation planned for you guys. And like one does, I decided to scrap it at the last minute because in my heart, I felt like I didn't want to be talking to you and just presenting information. I wanted to share information. And this is all about how the hell do I get through guilt? So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be telling you stories. I'm going to share 4 stories with you, my personal stories, as well as some other stories of the experience of guilt and shame, and then getting to the other side. And once I'm done with the stories, I'm going to get into just very quickly going through the slides so that I can at least get you that information. And it'll round everything out. And please feel free, while I'm going through the slides, if you'd like to do a screenshot so that you can keep the slide information, by all means, please do that. And then, like I said, about the last 10-15 minutes is where I will answer any questions. So use the chat button to chat if you need to with technical support, and use the Q&A button to ask me a question, and I will get to the questions at the very end. So I want to start with telling you a story that starts really back in 2005, 2006. But I'm going to start circa 2010. I was taking my advanced coaching class, and in this class, our assignment was to create a unique coaching process and then present that coaching process to the rest of the class. We were partnered up. One of the partners was to be the coach. The other partner was to be the client. I chose to be the client. I was going through a whole bunch of stuff then, and I thought this could be really good. Circa 2005, 2006. My parents get home from a 10-day program in Victoria, Canada, in which my mom took my dad. This pain clinic was to help people who had had surgery or had been in serious accidents that were still experiencing a great deal of pain from that accident and were on a great deal of narcotics and pain medication. And the point was to help them to be free from pain and also free from the drugs. My dad was a unique client or patient in that he had multiple sclerosis. And that's not typically what they dealt with. But my dad was on so many narcotics that it wasn't the MS that almost killed him at that time. It was the amount of pain medication that he was on. They invited my mom to go along in the program with my dad. 10 days later, my parents come back completely different people. These people that were joyous, these people that were vibrant. I hadn't heard my dad say that he was doing well or doing good in so many years. He was active, he was engaging in things that he hadn't engaged with before, and most of all, he was a joy to be around. It was incredible. The transformation in just 10 days. So at the clinic, they did hypnotherapy, holistic nutrition, they did acupuncture, they did massage therapy, and they did sound healing. So it was a really all-inclusive holistic approach to healing. That lasted for about a year for my dad. After that year, he started to kind of slip and slip and slip. And I was begging and pleading with him. Don't you want to live for your children? Don't you want to live for the sake of your health? Don't you want to live for the sake of your wife? Don't you want to live this happy and fulfilled life? And I kept asking him to continue to do the work. He had the opportunity to go back to the pain clinic, and he didn't want to. He thought it was going to be too much work to do again, and his buddy that he met the very first time around wasn't going to be there to join him. So he declined going. Circa, actually beginning of 2011 was when I took my advanced coaching class. I'm standing in the front of the classroom. There's 20 plus people staring at me. And we're nearing towards the end of the process my partner and I created. And I'm feeling this welling up of emotion, this shitstorm of emotion that was welling up in me. And I was just about to burst. And as I did, I screamed out to the entire class, I just wish he would die. It would be so much easier if he would just die. And I stood there, raw, vulnerable, a little bit in disbelief of what just flew out of my mouth, especially to 20 plus people that I really didn't know and didn't know me. And I stood there in all of this emotion. My dad and I had had a very, very difficult relationship at that point. Things were less than easy, and life was very difficult to navigate. My husband and I were living with my parents at the time and doing my best to help my mom care for my dad. And it was difficult. Everything was difficult. And I didn't know how to manage or deal with everything that I was experiencing. So that's what came up and out. At that time, that was my truth. I was shown exactly what it was that I was carrying around. And then I added guilt and shame to it from my outburst to that class. Later on, I would learn and have even more empathy for my dad and what he was going through and the choice that he made to not want to work through what he was going through. It's October of 2015. My husband and I had moved to Austin, Texas for a new adventure and something just for us. We had a friend from Phoenix come to visit and stay with us. We went to the lake that day. We had so much fun. And on the way home, I started feeling extremely nauseated, doubled over. And I felt this incredible pain come into my head. There happened to be a Walgreens right there. My husband, he pulls in, he gets me some Advil. I take 4 Advil. It barely touched it. We get home and I just had to lie down and I was out. I was out. I woke up enough just to force myself to go to dinner with my husband and our guest, our friend. I could barely get through dinner. I went home and I had to go back to bed. I felt so bad that I was ditching out on this friend that came all this way to spend this time with us. Luckily, he and my husband had a wonderful time together. But from that point on, into almost a year later, things just got worse. Fatigue set in, lethargy, extreme exhaustion. At one point, taking a shower was a feat. I would have to lie down because I was so tired, and then I had to lie down after my shower. But I still forced myself to go to the gym. I forced myself to go and see friends. I forced myself to see clients. I forced myself to still live my life. I thought if I could just power through it, I could be strong enough and I could get through this. And the domino day came. One thing after another. We're in our house. The cabinet literally falls off of the frame in front of me. And I looked at my husband and I said, I can't do this. I can't live here anymore. I don't want to die like this, and I don't want to die here. I want to get the care that I need. See, I had already been to plenty of doctors there, MDs and NDs. Unfortunately, NDs are not fully licensed in Texas like they are in Arizona. I was doing acupuncture twice a week. I was doing herbs, supplements. I changed my diet. I was doing everything that I knew how to do and thought that I was doing the right thing with exercising and, still keeping my social life as to not disappoint or let anybody down, and as to make sure that we still had a social life there. My husband still did some things on his own, but he didn't like leaving me alone when I was feeling like that. So I felt like I was really hindering our experience there until I just knew that our time there had to be done. And he moved back to Phoenix for me. We get to Phoenix. At this time, my dad was in assisted living up in Wisconsin. That was where he chose to reside. My mom there, seeing him and making sure everything's good to go, caring for him. And she spent half her time in Wisconsin. We arrive at my parents' house, and while I was started feeling a little bit better, things were extremely difficult. My husband joined a networking group so that he could rebuild his business that he had just built in Austin. In this networking group, he met a naturopathic doctor. He talked to her about me. We met, and I really liked her, so I started working with her. She started doing different treatments with me. I started taking different supplements. I started taking different herbs. At one point, they tested me to see if I had lymphoma. It was negative, which was great, but then what was wrong? She sent me to her mentor. I go and I see her mentor, and I tell her the same story that I've told every other doctor. She connects all the dots, and she says, I think it's one of three things. I'm going to test you for this one thing first, just so that we can rule and see if it is this. We get the blood work back, and my numbers are 10 times higher than the highest number in every category. The test showed that I had Epstein-Barr virus, otherwise known as mono. See, the thing is mine had gone autoimmune. And we had been dealing with black mold when we were living in Austin, so my immune system was starting to shut down. I did a year's worth of IV therapy, different supplements, different herbs, but this time, now I had a label, and now I had an excuse for not doing anything. I had an excuse to rest, a reason to rest and not push myself. It didn't help the fact that I still felt guilty that my husband was working his butt off to help us financially. We had this brand new home. And I wasn't sure exactly how to navigate this because I was used to having my calendar full. I was used to seeing friends all the time. I was used to meeting up with people. I was used to doing all these things that I thought that I had to do, that I should do, and doing my best still to see clients and feel like I was contributing. Still taking very good care of myself. A year later, we do the blood work, and I'm on the phone with my doctor and I'm looking at the test results, and all my numbers had gone up. I sunk. I felt defeated. A year's worth of expenses a year's worth of efforts, a year's worth of resting, a year's worth of taking it easy to only have my numbers go up. I'm not gonna lie, I had a 3-day pity party for myself. But in that time, I thought about what my dad had experienced and how awful he felt with MS. I thought about my plea to him. I also thought about the people that get the diagnosis that they're in late stage of cancer and they only have a few months to live. They sell everything. They go on their excursions and the trips of their lifetime, everything their soul had been wanting to do for so long, but they denied themselves. So I thought, okay, I wasn't going to sell everything because we had this new beautiful house that I loved. But I thought I'm going to 100% live my life on my terms. This is where I get to say yes when I want to say yes, no when I want to say no. I get to engage in what I want to engage in, and I will not engage with anyone or anything that is not nourishing, happy, peaceful, or feels good. Now, I had to do some mental, emotional work to get there. I had to deal with the guilt and the shame. And I also learned and realized that what I was asking my dad to do, I was asking him to do it for me. I wanted him to live the life I wanted him to live. I wanted him to live his life how I wanted. And in that realization, I realized that I was trying to sell my dad a very grandiose guilt trip ticket that he was refusing to buy. And so I worked through that as well. I decided to stop all the IV, all the herbs, all the supplements, and I decided to just live my life differently. See, by doing everything I was doing, I still was focused on the problem. I was focused on the EBV. I was so focused on healing it that I was focused on the problem itself. Instead of just letting go of the problem, living my life and allowing myself to heal. So I did the work that I needed to do, and I was able to start feeling a whole lot better and live my life a whole lot differently in accordance to what I truly needed for my utmost well-being. And it took that to give me permission to live my life that way. Last year, I was invited to speak at an online summit, and it was over days. And I listened to the fellow speakers, and I listened to this one man as he told the story of how his wife, an 18-month-old, died in a car accident. He was driving them to go on vacation. He was exhausted. He was burnt out. He had happened to just nod off. It was brief, but it was long enough so that he lost control of the car. It flipped 3 times, killing his wife and his 18-month-old instantly. His other son was in the car. He survived. This man his life was hanging on by a thread. He was airlifted to a hospital that had to amputate one of his legs. He returns home healing this amputation, sitting in a wheelchair while his son, who survived, is up in his room and somebody else is saying goodnight to him. He's sitting in his wheelchair in all of his shit. That deepest guilt, that deepest shame, that deepest pain of being in this home where his wife and his other son used to be with him. Not only needing to heal physically, but needing to heal mentally and emotionally. The amount of forgiveness that he was able to do with himself and the way that he was able to reckon with himself allowed him to become an inspirational and motivational speaker. He helps people now working through grief and guilt and sorrow and pain. A few years ago, I had a client come to see me to work through guilt and shame. When she was in her late teens, she was in an extremely abusive relationship. She was raised Catholic. And I tell you this because for her, she was just trying to make this relationship work because she thought she was supposed to marry him. She tried to get away from him, but he kept finding her. She ended up pregnant. For her to sit and think about having that child brought more guilt, brought more shame than she could bear. She was absolutely unwilling to bring a child into her life that could possibly be abused the way that she was being abused. And there was no way she was going to allow this man to abuse her child. So she made the decision to have an abortion. And finally, a little while after she was able to escape, she was able to rebuild her life. She was remarried, or she was married, excuse me, when I saw her as a client. And she was feeling a little bit guilty because her and her husband were talking about adoption. She had already had a few miscarriages. IVF and surrogacy was not an option for them. It wasn't in the budget. And adoption just didn't feel right. She was already carrying around the shame and guilt from having this abortion as a late teen. So we worked through how she could reckon with that, to reckon with herself, these deep emotions. And she came to realize that when she was at that age and dealing with what she was dealing with, there was no other option. She had no other choice at that time and that point in her life. She couldn't have made a different choice. She was able to work through and forgive herself. And she was able to work through and come to a place of being at peace with just being with her husband without children. She decided that adoption wasn't for her. And they were able to work out and discuss what their life would look like without children at a level that they hadn't been able to discuss before. They were able to use their love to help children and work with children and be with children in other ways. See, all of these stories bring with them great pain, bring with them great guilt and shame, some innate and a lot of it construct. We have these stories that we tell ourselves. And not often do we do our due diligence to find out if they're really true or not. But in all of us having to have had reckon with ourselves, we had to forgive ourselves. We had to put down the shame and the guilt. We had to sort it out. We had to see what we needed to let go of, and we had to see what we needed to transform and heal, because it was our responsibility to do so. The one person in all those stories that wasn't willing to do that didn't want to do that, was my dad. But I learned to respect him for that, because that was his life. It was his decision. He got to choose to do that or not. And that's what I learned. He passed away December 26th of 2016. My dad gave me some great gifts. I learned exactly what I do want to do and what I don't want to do. And I understood that my dad loved me to the capacity that he understood and knew love. So when you're working through shame and guilt, you have to put it down, because carrying it, it depletes you. It weakens you. It doesn't strengthen you. It doesn't. And you have to know it. You have to know what you're feeling and what you're experiencing in order to work through it. That's the only way that you can work through it. So as you think about the guilt and the shame, the things that you are dealing with in your own life right now, I'm going to share these slides with you. And as I share these slides, I'm going to go through them quickly. Like I said, please make sure that if you want to do screenshots, you have the information, by all means do so. And I want you to see how this information rounds out these stories that I told you. And I want you to see how this information fits in with what you're experiencing in your life. So, like I said, we have to first know what it is, and we have to differentiate what we're dealing with in order to heal it. So what I want to talk about is feeling bad versus guilt versus shame, because they are different. We can just simply feel bad about something, and we're not feeling guilty over it. We can feel guilty over something that we've done or said or failed to do or say. We can feel construct guilt, where we are taking on the guilt because somebody else has should on us, told us we must, we have to, whatever, and we're not living up to something, not feeling good enough, feeling less than, inadequate, those kinds of things. That's construct guilt, because that's adhering and abiding by other people's rules that we may have decided to take ownership at some point, but aren't truly innately ours. It's something we bought into. And then there's shame. Shame is not an innate feeling. When we're born, we love to rip that diaper off, and we love to run naked any opportunity we get. Shame is about deep embarrassment and feeling mortified. So shame, one of the biggest ones, you see the language that we use in our society, but one of the biggest ones is you've brought shame onto our family. One, that's giving a guilt trip to the person you're telling that to. But when you're saying that to them, what you're saying is it's not just their behavior that's unacceptable. You're saying that they themselves are unacceptable. And so that's what they internalize. And they feel guilty, not only for maybe what they're doing that might feel okay and right to them, but they're questioning because it's not okay with their family. But they question their very person. Shame is this ultimate judgment, and it's that feeling that there's something wrong with me, like who I am is wrong. Whereas guilt is more about a behavior, not who you are. Innate guilt. So again, that's when we've internalized, when we feel or when we realize that we've done something wrong. And when we feel like we want to or need to make something right. Shame is something that we carry from things being done to us. We don't carry guilt. A lot of times, people who are being abused, physically and or sexually, or have been assaulted, carry around shame, as though something was their fault, even though they're not the ones that did anything. Shame says there's something wrong with me. And shame typically includes a form of guilt, but not always. That's where we don't feel guilty because we were raped. We feel ashamed or carry around that shame, or abused. So shame, again, it very much cares about what other people think. And it really highlights all of those things that we feel might be true, or that we have accepted somehow some way is true about ourselves, as being inadequate, not good enough, not enough, less than. And that's how guilt can feel too. So if you're experiencing guilt, you're either experiencing your own or someone else's. And this is where the construct comes in, that mom guilt, that dad guilt, that boss guilt, that friend guilt, right? You're not doing enough. You're not doing enough for your children. You're not doing enough for your friends. You're not being a good enough mom. You're not being a good enough friend. According to whom? That's a question to ask yourself. According to whom? Who is judging this? And if somebody actually is saying this to you, well, that's definitely a conversation you need to have with them. Other people's opinions are not your concern. Your concern is your opinion of yourself. So here's innate guilt. Again, that's feeling that you've done something wrong, whether it's just a thought that you had and you feel guilty over it, or whether it's something that you've actually done and feel guilty, or something that you found out through somebody else that somehow a person felt bad due to something that you said or maybe misinterpreted. So when we feel innate guilt, typically it's going to coincide with our morals, our values, and our integrity. It also coincides with our empathy and our compassion. When we're experiencing deep guilt, we have to ask ourselves, and we have to check in with ourselves. Are we feeling guilty based on other people's opinions or the story that we're telling ourselves, right? Based on what we think other people think? This is where we have to reckon with ourselves. We have to know our own morals, our own values. We have to know our beliefs and what beliefs might be limiting us. We have to understand those in order to work through them, because we have to be able to be in integrity with ourselves. And like I said at the beginning, guilt is a unique emotion, a unique feeling, in that it typically brings along many friends. And so there's layers to work through. So I call the guilt is the lingering feel bad. Shame is where you're taking something on, and simply feeling bad to feel bad in the moment, or because you just felt bad right then, that's it. That's not necessarily guilt. So healing guilt. As you heard in those stories that I told, and from these slides, and from what I've shared, in order to heal and get through guilt, you must reckon with yourself. And reckoning with yourself looks like, what are you willing to accept about yourself? What are you willing to accept about another? What are you willing to take responsibility for? What are you willing to own? What are you willing to be okay with? What are you willing to learn? What are you willing to change? And are you willing to let go of and transform and change what is not within integrity within yourself? Are you willing to live by your own values? Are you willing to do the work to understand and know what those are? Your own morals, your own beliefs, so that you can be in integrity with yourself. It's about how you want to show up. Who do you want to be for the sake of yourself? In order to heal guilt, you have to be able to forgive yourself. You must do to be. You don't just be peace. You have to do peace to be peace, right? You don't, if you are experiencing a lot of unhappiness, you don't just do happiness if you've been unhappy. It takes practice. but it also takes doing the work. Either sitting down with yourself and going through forgiveness processes, or finding a practitioner to work with that can help guide you through. I have specific forgiveness processes that I share with people that takes them through the process of letting go. See, when we continue to feel shame and guilt, when we continue to be in a place of unforgiveness, not only are we holding ourselves energetically hostage, we're holding that other person energetically hostage. And we keep pressing that play button, thinking about it over and over and over again, keeping ourselves in prison. So it's up to us to do that work, to release ourselves from that illusionary prison. So if you want to be guilt-free, if you want to be free of shame, you need to free yourself. You need to have a conversation with the person that you might need to have the conversation with. If you're unable to have that conversation with them because it's not okay to contact them or because they've passed on, then it's up to you to do that forgiveness and that reckoning with yourself, to be able to let go of what happened so that you can move forward. If you're able to have the conversation and the person is unwilling to forgive you or let it go, well then, that's it. There's nothing else that you can do in your power. You have to respect where they're at and realize that it's not about you. It has nothing to do with you if they're unwilling to forgive or let go. That has to do with them and what they're not willing to reckon with within themselves. And that's okay. You can part with love, sending them love and hoping that maybe someday they do. And you know what? Maybe someday they don't. But that's not of your concern. Your concern is your well-being. So, anybody has any questions? We only have a couple of minutes. And I'm not seeing that there are any questions. If you are interested in the forgiveness processes that I offer, you can visit my website, thepursuitguru.com. And on there is a free recording, a free meditation to help you to get into a space and a place of being able to relax. And I want to encourage you to put your guilt down. Allow yourself to know it, to understand it, to sort through it. Allow yourself that opportunity to heal, because you're the only one that can do that. You must reckon with yourself. I want to thank you all. Thank everybody for taking this time to be with me, to be a part of this. Thank you for allowing me to be vulnerable and share my stories. Within stories, we get to hear how we relate to others. And when we know that another person has been able to heal through some pretty difficult stuff, it tends to give us hope to be able to do the same thing. You know, nobody thought that a mile could be run in only 4 minutes. It was done. And not long after that, it was broken time and time and time again. Give yourself permission. That's it. You have to have permission to heal, no one else's. So give yourself permission to reckon with yourself. Give yourself permission to be free and let go. Give yourself permission to forgive yourself, and give yourself permission to heal. Thank you so much.